Hi all, today there will be an unusual video. There will be a lot of reasoning, but I will immediately warn you, this information does not pretend to be true, this is just my opinion. I could be wrong about something. Sorry for the machine language and quality. So, perhaps many gamers will agree, the HDR calibration setting looks like hell for the average gamer now. People are looking for guides on the internet, asking questions, for example, please tell me the settings for Game A for TV Model B. And this can be understood, because the settings to the user are sometimes absolutely unfriendly, and this is a problem, because an incorrectly adjusted image can look very bad and completely distort the look of the game. I can come up with a rule: if there are settings that can be configured incorrectly, then they will definitely be configured incorrectly. The situation is complicated by the fact that the calibration settings in the game are often not clear. And there are also TV settings. Why is everything so complicated? The main problem of HDR is displays. All HDR displays are different with different characteristics. The same content may look different on different displays. For example, the game is shown with a maximum brightness of 1000 nits, but your TV has a maximum brightness of 700 nits. The display is trying to adapt the picture to your TV. This is called tone mapped. If you are watching a HDR video file, it usually contains metadata that tells the display its characteristics so that the display can adapt them correctly. For HDR movies, the situation may not be so problematic, because the maximum brightness is not always very high, and the visibility of objects outside the range of your TV is not so critical. For HDR games, everything is more complicated. The game can try to display an image from 5000 nits or even 1000 nits. Different TVs can do tone mapping in their own way. Often, some TVs simply cut off the part of the brightness that is higher than their capabilities. Example, the game plays 5000 nits, but your TV has a maximum brightness of 1000 nits. The game shows important game objects, sky, enemy silhouette, etc., at brightness more than 1000 nit, but you cannot see them. All you see is the light. Of course, there is a TV dynamic tone mapping function, which seems to try to transform all the incoming brightness, that is range, into what is available for your TV. But no matter how clever such algorithms are, the result may not be good enough. Some bright or dark objects became smaller or larger than they should have, or disappeared altogether. The ideal result will be if the game is shown with a brightness range for your particular TV. So you get the image result as close as possible to the one that the game developers intended, and the TV would not need to transform excess brightness level for your TV. For these purposes, game developers make in-game HDR settings, but life can't be too easy, yeah? These settings may look completely different in different games of different developers. Sometimes they can be completely unfriendly and not understandable. There may be a different number of them. The options may even be named differently: peak brightness, simple brightness, lighting, paper white, white and black point, contrast, etc. You can go crazy. It's good when there is a special wizard for peak brightness. One rectangle is displayed with the maximum brightness that your TV can show. By increasing the brightness of the rectangle next to it, you will gradually reach the value when the brightness is equal. This will determine and indicate the maximum brightness of your TV. But sometimes there is no such wizard, and for maximum brightness you need to specify a numerical value manually. Of course, you must recognize him somewhere. For example, in the specification of your TV or on the rting.com website. But in game settings, the brightness value may not be specified in nits at all, and it has special units, as for example in Death Stranding. Watch my video about this game settings. Or like in Mortal Kombat 11, which has 3 choices, but does not explain exactly what the brightness value is for each. It's even harder for paper white parameter. More often than not, you should set the value by eye, finding a balance between the contrast of dark objects and the brightness of light objects. But how? Unclear. It's good when the game gives at least a test picture, by which you need to evaluate the result, but sometimes there is nothing. The best option is like in Doom Eternal. You can select any place in the game and see the changes in your settings in real time. But unfortunately, this is not the case in all games. And there are also TV settings. And tell me, should ordinary users do all this? After all, We just want to turn on the console and play, enjoying the picture without shamanic dances. To make things easier, Sony and Microsoft have added basic console HDR calibration settings. That is, you have configured the parameters on the system once, and games use them, probably through special API, to display them correctly. It's convenient and useful, probably, in an ideal world. But in the real world, the following happens. Often these basic HDR settings in the console use only a few exclusives from their own game studios. Now I remember Ghost of Tsushima in terms of Sony. Needless to say, most games are cross-platform projects, and I can understand game developers. Games are made by different teams, use different game engines and different methods. Linking your projects to these API functions and optimizing them is additional human, time and money resources. It is easier to write the most universal code that is easier to port to all platforms with minimal revisions and optimizations. Therefore, games often have their own settings. Or, for example, it is absolutely impossible to force some game to use these basic HDR console settings due to the peculiarities of this game, the game engine, the methods used, etc. Remember the HDR settings in Doom Eternal. But if we return to the conversation about the HDR and game settings, there are situations when it is impossible to configure it correctly, although you seem to be doing everything right. Watch my video about the HDR settings for Red Dead Redemption 2. Or another situation, there are no HDR settings in the game at all, and the game also does not use the basic HDR settings in the console. Do whatever you want in this situation. It's good if the maximum brightness in such a game does not exceed 1000 nits. Perhaps the result will be good. But what if the game outputs 5000 nits? For example, like Crysis Remastered? Of course, the dynamic tone mapping option of TV can help in this situation, but the result may be far from ideal. And you should somehow find out that the brightness in the game is very high. The average user learns about these values only from game analytics from reputable internet sources. Sony and Microsoft founded HGIG, HDR Gaming Interest Group. It now includes some game developers, TV manufacturers, etc. The organization develops guidelines common to game, display and console developers. A typical example, a TV manufacturer gives a specification for its TV. These parameters are entered into the database. When connected, the console identifies the TV, and based on the parameters from the database, it automatically sets the recommended parameters for the game. The player doesn't need to think about them. But it looks like the situation with this is bad, and it rarely works, because the interaction of all participants in the chain is not a fast process. Is it worth the effort commercially? Another suggestion is to categorize displays based on their maximum brightness level. For example, the display is in category 2 and the console sets the parameters in the game according to this category. But what if your TV can display more than 1000 nits brightness? You may have seen the HGIG mode option to LG TV. There is a lot of controversy about her. HGIG is not a technology that everyone needs to support. It's not some kind of magic that knows how any scene should look in any game at any given time. HGIG is an organization that develops general guidelines. On the organization's website, it is indicated on the main page about this. The organization has not created any HGIG modes. But what does HDR mode do? I can't find out for sure. I can only assume that it limits the maximum brightness to 1000 nits in order to correspond to category 2, for example. From games you need the same display video with brightness parameters corresponding to category 2. This decision of everything leveling is good, probably. But if does my TV support brightness, for example 2000 nits? Why would I limit it to 1000 nit? And this will not be a standard, because the sense of releasing new displays is lost. Some are always better than others. TV parameters continues to improve the best features and allow you to sell new TVs. If on all TVs it is necessary to include the same limitation in maximum brightness in order for the game picture to look correct, then what is the sense in the new better characteristics? What's the sense in new TV? If you have the ability to adjust the HDR for a custom brightness level, then I see no sense in this HGIG mode. If you can calibrate the HDR parameters of the game for your TV, then you do not need any tone mapping mode, not dynamic and not HGIG. If the game produces a brightness level greater than the capabilities of your TV and this cannot be changed in any way, then cutting off the brightness level above a certain value in HGIG mode will hardly help you. You may have seen several YouTube videos in which dynamic tone mapping option try to set to often compared to HGIG enabled. In one mode, the picture is better, the sources are brighter, in the other, the picture is worse and the lights are faded. Of course this will be so because you calibrated the game to one brightness value. In changing tone mapping mode, you change the maximum brightness of your TV and the HDR calibration is broken. It is absolutely incorrect to compare in this way. You need to recalibrate for each mode. And is it even correct to call it HGIG mode? I think there is confusion in terms, invented by HGIG mode and HGIG organization that develops general recommendations for its participants. Let's continue talking about TV settings. Your task is not to make the image of the game more beautiful. Your task is to make the game picture that the game developers intended. The game may not look good enough in some scenes. You must understand, if in game A you set some TV settings, and for game B you need to change them a lot, for example, increase the color, decrease the brightness, etc. This means that either in one game you incorrectly configured the HDR calibration, or one game has problems with graphics. The TV shouldn't compensate for the graphics problems of the games. It is not correct. Your task is to provide a reference monitor with fixed settings. All your games should be adjusted to it. For example, Xbox has a special TV calibration wizard for this. Set your TV parameters and don't touch them again. Of course there are all these enhancing effects, for example, dynamic contrast, black tone and details, edge enchantment, super resolution, true motion, motion flow, live color and others. They can both improve the picture and worsen in some scenes. Everything you need to do with the game picture is already done by your console. The rest is subjective to your preference, but if you turn them on, do not be surprised that after looking at the game settings for your TV from someone, you get a different result than the same person. Because this is an amendment of the TV settings, also a mistake, you have performed the HDR calibration settings with the same TV settings and are playing game with other TV settings. It is all the more strange to change the settings for brightness, contrast, color and color temperature of the TV. These are baseline values that do not need to be changed, unless of course you do not calibrate your TV. This can also bias the correct HDR calibration settings in the game. Of course, choosing different TV modes, for example, standard, movies, games, etc., the default value may differ. For example, one has increased color. Use TV game mode. It usually provides minimal latency, that is, the time between pressing a button and the reaction of an object on the display. But if you are satisfied with the latency in expert mode, for example, use it. If you notice image deterioration when switching to game mode, you can try expert or standard mode all the more. By the way, get few more problems, some players have noticed an increasing the input lag on their TVs in HDR mode. Good if TV firmware fix comes out. And I will not even talk about questions, for example, whether it is necessary to enable the allow YCC 4:2 inches option in the Xbox, whether it is necessary to select 8, 10, 12 bits, or in Y on TV to look for the ultra deep color option. All these questions and complexities burden the simple gamer. Summarizing, what needs to be done to make the life of a simple gamer easier? I don't know. It would be nice if the display would not only send the parameters of its model to the console. What if the console had full control over TV modes and settings? For example, develop the idea of HDMI SEC or create a new protocol. The console may control modes, TV options to ensure the result is as close as possible to the one that the game developers intended. But this is unlikely to be, because all displays are different and their post-improvement effects need to be sold somehow, and the simple identification of the display to set the optimal calibration parameters at the level of the main ones in the console, which only some games use now, is still a problem. Thanks. Like it if you like it and subscribe to the channel. Leave comments about your experience with HDR settings in games. Bye.